Thank you so much. Well, welcome everybody to our little webinar about self-publishing. This was actually Christian's idea, and I think it's a good one. We're going to introduce ourselves to you in just a minute here, but we're very happy to have you all here. So why don't we just get started. I'm going to share my screen, which is a PowerPoint presentation, and I won't be able to see you. And then when we get to the Q&A portion, I'll take that off the screen and we'll just be able to see one another. Oh, host disabled attendee screen sharing, Christian.
Oh dear, let me see.
I know, all these crazy settings.
I thought you had that. Let me see if I can do that. I'll make you host.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
There.
There we go. All right, so this is our topic today, and we're going to introduce ourselves. And so I'll just tell you a little bit about me. I began self-publishing about 10 or 12 years ago. My first book was a memoir about 10 years I spent in a cult in the 1990s. And since then, I've written a bunch of novels, middle grade series, and I'm mostly focused now on writing contemporary mystery fiction set in Vancouver. And you can find me at theselfpublishingcoach.com. And my fiction is at alexandraamor.com. And then, Christian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm Christian McNeill, living in Glasgow in Scotland. I co-wrote a book last year with Barbara Smith, Addiction, One Cause, One Solution. And I met Alexandra before that, and we'd done some bits and pieces together. I appeared in her podcast once. But what she had a very, her best kept secret was she does this publishing coaching program for people who want to self-publish on Amazon. And I was keen to do the self-publishing thing, but I wasn't that confident about the various things on Amazon. And it was just a wonderful experience. It was so she's so knowledgeable, and we published our book successfully in a couple of weeks after it was finally finished editing. And I would never have been able to do that without you, Alexandra. I mean, I would have been paying some agency or something like that. So yes, I'm a 3-piece coach and trainer as well, and my website is up there, elementsofwellbeing.net. So I am delighted. I was really encouraging Alexandra to sort of get to share her best kept secret, because it's it was just such a wonderful kind of bespoke service that for me took it from the the finished manuscript to the published Kindle and paperback volumes, and she knows everything about everything.
Well, thank you, Christian. I appreciate that. All right, let's jump in. So this is an overview of what we're going to talk about today. It's a really big subject, and there's lots of material. I teach this also as a half-day workshop, so cramming it into 60 minutes is quite a big task, but we'll do the best we can. Your brain might feel like scrambled eggs at the end, but that's okay, because I'm going to provide you with resources once I'm finished giving my presentation. Plus, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And so I would suggest hold your questions till the end, maybe write them down. They may get answered as we move along, but if not, then you can ask us when we get to the Q&A section. And the other thing I wanted to say too is that really today is about information, not persuasion. So we're not trying to convince you about that self-publishing is the right way to publish a book. There's, every author has to find their own way that works for them. And so what we really want to do is offer you information so that you're more informed about how this works. And so, like I said, it's a lot to get through. If your brain feels like this at the end, don't worry, it'll be okay. So a couple of points to keep in mind. I really think of self-publishing as a 3-legged stool, and there are 3 distinct skills that we need to learn when we start doing it. And they're obviously writing, publishing, and marketing. And they are very distinct. The craft of writing is very different from the stuff that we're going to talk about today, the publishing, which is again very different from marketing a book. And so I just wanted to mention that right up front, that there are these three distinct skill sets that you get into once you start learning about self-publishing. So let's talk about what it is right off the bat. It's also called independent publishing, and I'm going to use those two terms independently. So traditional publishing, which was the only option until about 2008, 2009, looked like this. So as the author, you would write the book, sell the rights to the book to the publisher, and then they would take care of all the editing, proofreading, cover design. The book would be published on their schedule, and the control was really mostly in their hands. The book was a piece of intellectual property, but the author sells it to the publisher in order to get them to publish it for them. And as I say, there was no other alternative at that time. And what this created too was a situation where it was publishers who decided what people got to read. And I didn't really think about this until I started learning about self-publishing myself. But we've all heard of that situation that happens where someone submits a book and gets rejected again and again, and then finally gets accepted and published. What that means is that it's the publisher who decides what the reading public gets to receive. And what I really like about self-publishing is that it's more of a democratization. Now readers get to decide what they read, because there's more availability of all different kinds of books. And so on the money side, it looked like this. So the author got about 10% of royalties. That's kind of average. Of course, it would change with every contract, and some would be less and some would be more. And then the publisher retained the majority of the price of each book, or the sale price of each book that came in. And then two things changed publishing forever. So print on demand, which I'm going to go into and explain, and also e-readers. And they both happened roughly at around the same time. So if you're not aware, print on demand is a situation where an author can set up a book at a printing place, sort of like Amazon. And when your customer goes to the retailer and orders a book from Amazon, Amazon then prints one copy, puts it in that little cardboard sleeve, and ships it off to the person. So until this happened, and the reason this happened was that because printers became so efficient that they were able to bring the cost of doing that down so low that it made it feasible to just print one copy of a book at a time and send it out. Before this, if you were publishing yourself, you would have to print, 2,000 or 3,000 copies of a book in order to bring the cost per book down low enough to make it reasonable for someone to buy the book. So you couldn't sell a book for $50 a copy. So that's what print on demand is. And it changed everything in publishing. And it's really quite miraculous. And it means that when authors self-publish, they don't have to warehouse those thousands of books, that we really don't have to be involved with shipping and mailing and all that kind of stuff and warehousing. And I've personally known a couple of different authors who have done a big print run of their books before print on demand existed, and then lost them in a fire or a flood or that kind of thing. So you can imagine how devastating that would be. So that's print on demand. And then the second big part of this is e-readers. And that changed everything as well, because suddenly people could have books immediately onto their devices. And I remember working in the public library in Vancouver a million years ago. It would have been in the early 90s. And even then, every once in a while, an e-reader would come onto the market, and people would sort of tout that it was the new thing in reading, but they were never very comfortable. The screen, didn't make the reading experience very pleasurable. But that changed with the Kindle, which came about around 2008, 2009. And so, like I say, now at that point, then books could be delivered immediately to people, and they could read as many books as they wanted. And also the price point, which we're going to talk about in a little bit too, initially was really low, especially in the romance genre. So let me just look at my notes. And going back to the point about publishers deciding what people wanted to read, there were a lot of, as a result, there were a lot of reading groups that were really underserved. And a couple that come to mind is, um, and and I should say, I'll digress for just a second and say that the romance writers are always at the forefront of every change that comes along in publishing. They're just really good at embracing change and moving with the times. And so one of the things that happened when the Kindle came about is that readerships like um, people who wanted to read romance novels with people of color as the main characters, those took off. Again, romance novels or any kind of book really with LGBTQ characters, again, those were two reader populations that were really underserved. And because of the Kindle and self-publishing, those reader groups got to be satisfied and got to find books that really worked for them. So that's part of what I refer to as the democratization of publishing. So broadly speaking, there are three options when you want to self-publish a book. You can do it yourself, and that's what I focus on helping people with. That's what I helped Christian with. And then you can work with what's called a hybrid publisher. I don't have a lot of experience with that. We can touch on it a little bit maybe at the end. And then you can also use a service whereby they sort of do the stuff that I help people with one-on-one. They tend to be very expensive, and there are a lot of sharks in the water too, and they will sometimes rip people off, for lack of a better way of putting it. So today we're mostly going to focus on the do-it-yourself option. That's what we're going to talk about. So then the question becomes, why self-publish your book? Oh, here, I'm going to go back for a second, sorry. And I think what's important to note here is that no one cares about your book as much as you do. And that becomes really important in terms of things like choosing a cover, having creative control, choosing a title. I know someone now who's trying to choose a title for her book, and she's working with a traditional publisher, and she doesn't like the titles that they're offering, and they don't like the titles that she's offering, and they're at a bit of an impasse, which is, can be kind of a dissatisfying experience. Your royalties are going to be greater when you self-publish, so they're going to be closer to 70% as opposed to that 10% that we talked about earlier. And books, I think, are a great business model. So one of the things that I like about them is that they're mostly evergreen. So you write it once, you publish it once, and then it can sell an infinite number of times. There are certain exceptions to that, of course. If you write a book about how to use WordPress, let's say, it's going to go out of date pretty fast. But otherwise, fiction, for example, somebody can find your book in 100 years and still be interested in it. And I really like that. Scalability is the word that people use, isn't it? Okay, so let's look at this. And I'm using Christian's book as an example because I love this point that a book is not just one book. And I'm actually, my throat is getting sore. I'm going to take a sip of water. Sorry. So we've got a bit of a progression here. So on the left, that's just a snapshot of a manuscript that I was working on at the time. And then what you'll see is that manuscript initially becomes three different things. So it can become an ebook, it can become a paperback, and then it can also become an audiobook. And recording your own audiobooks even is getting easier and easier these days. So that's three sort of assets that you can look at that you've created just from writing one manuscript. And by offering readers the option of or options about the way that they like to read, some people don't like reading on an e-reader at all, so then they have the option of choosing the paperback. Some people like to read audiobooks, and some people do both. I have an uncle who always buys, whenever he buys a book, he buys the ebook and the audiobook bundled together, and then he has the choice about how he wants to listen to them. And then on the far right, I hope you can see that, then with each of those things, those assets, you can multiply them by countries and by languages. So this kind of gets into advanced territory, but for example, when you put a book up on Amazon, it's not just available in the country where you live, it's available globally. And if you go wide with your books, which we'll talk about too in a second, excuse me, that means that it can be sold in much smaller bookstores in foreign markets that you've probably never heard of. And then another way that the book can go, can reach people is because it's your intellectual property and you hold the rights to it, you can sell it to those who want to translate it and publish it in a different language. That's not something that I've ever done, and it's something I'd like to look into, but I just wanted to mention it because it does exist as an option. Oh, and another thing too is that very often fiction authors create box sets. So if they have a series of books, they'll bundle them together 3 at a time and put them in a box set. And it's called a box set because it used to actually be in a box. If you ever went to a bookstore and you saw books that had been bundled together like that and they were individual. In this case, it's just the 3 books together as an ebook, but the same thing applies. That becomes another asset. And if somebody really likes your work and you've bundled things together, then they might buy that instead of buying the books individually. So here's a bit about how it works. And of course, since I made this PowerPoint, things have changed a little bit. But what you do with your manuscript is you create an EPUB file that's for all the vendors that aren't Amazon. And then until last week, you created, with the exact same manuscript, you created a Mobi file. Amazon had to be a little bit different. And so the file that you upload to that stores was called a Mobi, but last week they changed it. Now they want EPUBs as well. And your ebook has a JPEG cover that's just the front. And then you have a PDF file, which is the interior of the book. And MP3 files, of course, create the audiobook. And I just wanted to show you what your covers, an example of what your covers look like. So the one on the left is your ebook cover. So it's just the front. And then you work with a cover designer who creates both of these. And the paperback one, of course, is that spread. So that's the back on the left, the spine in the middle, and then the front on the right. And that wraps around the PDF file that you have for the interior of the book. Christian, I'm going to stop and say, do you have anything you want to interject, or I'm just motoring along here? Is that okay?
No, it's great. It's great.
Okay.
Yeah, I was very lucky to find a very good cover designer as well. So
Yeah, he did a great job. Okay, cool. All right, thanks. And then, so the interior of your book looks like that. So it's a PDF. It's just an Adobe PDF document, and you can see the spreads there. The blank page at the top on the right-hand side is where the book begins. Usually there's a blank page, and then you can see on the bottom, that's a 2-page spread. So it just looks like that. And I often have people say to me when I explain this, they expect it to be more complicated, but it's really not as complicated as you might think. So let's talk about how the books actually get onto the retailers and how you sell them. So this is a little snapshot of my dashboard at Amazon. And so what you do is you create an author dashboard, and you can see in the top left there's the little plus sign, and it says create a new title, Kindle ebook or paperback. And once you've got all the pieces in place that you need, so you've got your cover like we talked about on the previous slide, we've got your interior file, you come in here, you've created the dashboard, and you just hit that plus sign and you start to create your ebook. And so you have to go through the process twice. You do it once for the ebook, and then you do it a second time for the paperback, and you're uploading the different files. So for the ebook, you're uploading an EPUB file and then just the front cover. For the paperback, you're uploading that full spread of the cover and the PDF interior And we're not going to get into it too deeply, but you'll see they've got that little checklist there. They just want you to be prepared. You need your description as you're doing this. So you're going to write a description for the book. And that's what appears when people are searching for the book on Amazon. That's what they can see when they're searching that describes the book for them. You're going to choose some keywords. And so keywords are basically search terms that when people are in the online retailer, they might search for something like, how to write, how to do calligraphy, let's say. And so you're going to enter, you get up to 7 keywords to enter that might be terms that people would be searching for if they were trying to find your book. And then categories are the broader categories that every book goes into. So mystery novel, science fiction, self-help, all that kind of stuff. So you're going to be prepared with that information before you start to upload the book, so that you can just plug it into what it looks like. It has some boxes that you can fill in, and that's how you do that. And then this is just a quick snapshot. That's the Kobo dashboard. And I'm going to talk in a bit about what the strategy that most people use in order to upload their books. You don't have to upload them to 57 different stores, and we'll talk about how you can manage that. So we've covered a little bit of this already, but I just wanted to quickly outline that for each book, you've got the different files, and that explains what they are. And what's next? And then the thing that really goes on when we're self-publishing is that we have a team of people that we're working with. And this is a really important point, is that it's called self-publishing, but many people prefer to use the term independent publishing because you're not actually doing it yourself. So you're going to work with a copy editor and probably a proofreader, ideally. You're going to work with a cover designer, most likely, and maybe someone to format the book as well. So it's kind of like having a team of experts around you to help you bring that book to fruition and up onto the other different retailers. So it works like this. So ebooks are sold directly from the retailer, and you guys have all been on an online retailer, someone like Amazon or Chapters or Barnes and Noble, and you have maybe purchased an ebook directly, and it just gets delivered right to your device. And then for paperbacks, what you do is you upload your paperback to Amazon. That Amazon, of course, is the big kahuna when it comes to online retailers. So you upload your paperback to Amazon, but what you actually are going to do is choose limited distribution. You get 2 options. You can choose limited or expanded. And additionally, I recommend that authors also upload the paperback to a company called Ingram Spark. And on Ingram Spark, you choose expanded distribution, which means that libraries and bookstores will be able to purchase the book. If you don't do that, libraries and bookstores won't purchase the book from Amazon. And that's because, for a couple of reasons. One, they don't get the library discount. They don't get the book at a discounted price when they purchase it from Amazon. Plus, libraries and bookstores just, have a bit of a, what would we say, a prejudice about Amazon taking over the world. So it gets a little more complicated than that once we start drilling down, but I just wanted to give you a broad overview that that's how it works. So now let's say a local friend went into a small bookstore in your town or your neighborhood, and the bookstore may not necessarily stock your book. In fact, they probably don't. But if the person gives them the title and your name, the bookstore is going to be able to look it up and find the book available at distributors because you've published it with Ingram Spark. So Ingram Spark isn't a store the way that Amazon is. Like people don't go to Ingram Spark and buy books. It's for people who work behind the scenes, like libraries and bookstores, and they can order the book through distributors because it's available at Ingram Spark. So I hope that makes sense. And all of this, the stuff related to the paperback, of course, is possible because of print on demand that we talked about earlier in the presentation. So now you probably, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, I'm conscious that there's a lot of information here, and if you work with, if you do write your book, or you have written your book, and you work with Alexandra, she has this very comprehensive kind of checklist, and for me that was supplemented with kind of coaching calls, because you know, I know we're all different, but I found this level of detail overwhelming. So I could only do a bit at a time. But having said that, it was done within a couple of weeks, you know, a couple of weeks. It wasn't a year's work, but yeah, you know, there was definitely quite a lot to drill down into. So I just thought I'd interject that, Alexandra.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such a good point. And it can be quite overwhelming at the beginning, and the way that the pieces all fit together can be a little bit confusing. The good news is, Christian, right now that you've done it once, you could do it again, right?
With your help.
Oh, I don't know. Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. So then this is the sort of the key point. What everybody wants to know, what does it actually cost? So first we're going to look at pricing. So this is for ebooks only, and most retailers will give you 70% royalties. So that's the bottom line on that spreadsheet. But Amazon, of course, has to be different. So your royalty is going to depend on the price of the book. So if your ebook is priced between 99 cents and $2.99, then your royalty is 35%. So when someone buys the book, you're going to get 35% of that purchase price. When the book is priced between $2.99 and $9.99, which frankly is the majority of what most books are priced at, then you get that 70% royalty. And when the book is more than $10, the royalty goes back down to 35%. I do not know why, but if you're published on Kobo or Barnes and Noble or whatever, see, coming back to what we said about box sets, if you're selling a box set, it's probably going to be more than $10. So on Amazon, you would only get 35% royalty, but if you were published everywhere else, you would get 70% of that $15 or $20 or whatever it is you're charging for the book. So I'm just going to give a quick example. So if your ebook is $4.99, you're going to get about $3.50, and Amazon's going to get the remaining 50 cents. And then for print, it's slightly different. So I'm just going to focus on Amazon now, because they're the one big online retailer that has print on demand. The other ones are mostly going to be ebooks. And for paperback books, it's a fixed royalty of 60%, no matter what the price of your book is. And then you have to subtract the printing cost. And so what I've shown you there is that's the bottom of the dashboard for one of my books. And once I had uploaded the cover and the interior print file, and so now the dashboard knows how many pages the book has, it's going to give me that figure in red, that $3.54. And that's what it's telling me, that every book that I print is going to cost that much. So for example, if you're selling a book, your paperback is $10.99. That 60% flat royalty fee means that you're going to get $6.59, except they're going to subtract the printing cost of $3.54. So that in the end, you're going to receive $3.05. So ebooks are definitely more profitable than paperbacks, but it's always great to have a paperback option available to people who prefer to read that way. And so then in terms of other costs, I just wanted to very generally give you a sense of what you might spend on getting the book produced. And then in the next slide, we're going to talk about the bootstrapping version as well. So these are just some vague ideas about what the various things will cost you. And I think at a bare minimum, this is probably what you're going to need. When I first started out, I also hired a story editor, um, someone who could, from a very high level, tell me whether or not the story was working. If you guys are mostly coaches and three principles practitioners, that probably won't apply to you. But that was something that I did for fiction. So anyway, you're looking at um, about $1,000 per book once you add up all these different things. And I like to think of that as an investment. So I look at it as investing in myself. Some authors get kind of twisted out of shape and don't like that it can cost this much to publish a book. But going back to the point that books are evergreen and you can sell them an infinite number of times, in your lifetime and for 70 years after your lifetime, because that's how long the rights exist. So you can actually leave the rights to your book to someone in your will. Then I think it's a pretty good investment in my mind. And then we've got a bootstrapping version here too. So, I mean, if you wanted to, you can get friends and family or your followers or a service like Grammarly to go through and do the editing portion. There are cover design options, places like Fiverr. There are also pre-made options. And Christian, that was something you and Barbara looked at too a little bit, was a pre-made cover, correct?
Yeah, there's a site with actually some lovely designs, but what we found was, so each design is already set up with a fake title and you can change your own. But what we found was, as soon as you wanted to, I mean, you could change the lettering, you could change the wording, but as soon as you wanted to do anything more, like change the color or the size or the font, it was becoming very expensive. So what started out as, $59.99 for a cover, by the time you'd added a few modifications, it was, it's way up to hundreds of dollars. And I can recommend a graphics guy if anybody's interested in that, cover designer.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And so if you're going to spend that on the pre-mades with all the add-ons, then you might as well go from scratch, which is what you guys ended up doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, just so you guys know that is an option. And then book formatting. So draft to digital, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is an aggregator. They have some free formatting tools at their website as well. So, all right, what's next? And then I just wanted to mention a few of the tools I use as well that you can consider. So Scrivener is a writing software that I really like. It's $45 US. It's worth 10 times that. It's been life-changing for me to use Scrivener. And the reason is very simple. It's really powerful. It has lots of bells and whistles, which I love, and I use some of them. But the really key thing about Scrivener is this binder that they have on the right-hand side. I should have done a screenshot for you here, where you can see all the chapters of your book. You can divide your book into scenes or chapters, and you can just drag them and drop them if they belong, you need to move them around, belong in another place. My first book I wrote in Word because Scrivener didn't exist. And I created a new document for every chapter. And you can imagine what a nightmare that was. Just if I had an idea, I needed to add something to a certain section, I'd have to think of, well, which chapter was that in? And go digging through all my Word files. So I can't rave about Scrivener enough. And then Vellum is a software that you can use to format your book. It is quite an investment, so I would only really recommend it if you're planning to publish a whole bunch of books, because then it pays for itself within probably by the time you've written the second book. Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, of course. Newsletter hosting is kind of a basic, which you guys may already have. Web hosting. And then I use a service called BookFunnel to deliver what's called a reader magnet. So I have a couple of free novels available on my website. And what I used to do before I had BookFunnel was somebody would sign up for those. And that's to get people on my newsletter list so that I can tell them about future books. and I would email them the book, and then they would have trouble transferring it from their computer onto their e-reader, their Kindle or their iPad or whatever. So then I ended up being like technical support a lot of the time, which is not why you sign up to be an author. So BookFunnel does that stuff for you. The customer gets a link, and then they get a whole bunch of instruction, and BookFunnel also has a help desk. So if somebody runs into trouble, a reader runs into trouble, they contact BookFunnel instead of me. And so then you get paid through your author dashboard. So at the beginning, you connect that to your bank account or to PayPal, and the retailer sends you what you've earned that month, usually at the end of the month. With sites like Amazon, it's usually there's a 90-day delay, just so that you're aware. And if you are outside the United States, you want to sign up for what's called an ITIN number, so that the retailers don't withhold 30% of your earnings. So it's really important to do that. And there's a whole list of countries that have a treaty with the United States. So you just have to make sure your country is a part of that treaty. And then you apply, send them a bunch of information. I had to send them a photocopy of my passport, and you get assigned this ITIN number, and then those earnings aren't withheld. So just something important to remember. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, and let's dive into it a little bit deeper. So there are many, many ebook retailers, especially all over the world. Many of them you've never heard of. So what I usually recommend to authors is that you have your own individual dashboard at the big ones. So Amazon, Kobo, and maybe Apple. And then you use an aggregator for all the others. So I use a company called Draft to Digital. And what that means, and the reason you want to have a dashboard at the big retailers is that gives you the opportunity to do advertising with them. So merchandising opportunities or marketing. So for example, if you only went through Draft to Digital and sent the books to Amazon and all the other retailers through there, you wouldn't be able to have an ads account. And if you ever wanted to advertise the book down the road, you wouldn't be able to do that at Amazon or Kobo. So you create a dashboard at the big guys, you create a dashboard at Draft to Digital, and then Draft to Digital pushes the book up to all the other retailers. They do take a cut. So just like Amazon keeps 30%, Draft to Digital keeps, I think it's 10% of the retail price of the book. And that's how they make their money, but it's free to start the account and to upload the book and all that kind of stuff. All right, so let's talk about the different publishing options that are available. We touched on this a little bit earlier. So the 3 different ways that you can publish a book. And it's the do-it-yourself one that we've mostly been talking about today. And hybrid publishing sort of combines aspects of independent publishing and traditional publishing. I have a friend who publishes her books with a hybrid publisher, and I find it really expensive. But she's happy because she gets some support that she wouldn't have otherwise with things like marketing and the book launch and copy editing and all that kind of stuff. And those are things that you have to do yourself if you're doing it DIY. And then the publishing services, I touched on this a little bit earlier. This is a service where you would just kind of hand off your book and they would take care of all the things we've talked about in the DIY. But as I said earlier, there are lots of people who take advantage of authors who don't know what's a fair price. So I've got a couple of links there. So if you go to the selfpublishingcoach.com/watchdog, excuse me, there's an organization in the UK called the Alliance of Independent Authors. And they have this great thing where they have this watchdog desk, and they will vet self-publishing services. And so when you go to that link, that's actually a pretty link. It just directs you to the Alliance of Independent Authors watchdog desk. And you can find a list there of all the publishing services. And so let's say, for example, you were considering one, you can go there, there's a search box, type it in, and then see if the Alliance has vetted them and what they have to say about them. And then the other place you can look to be sure that if you want to use the service, that you don't get ripped off, is a Writers Beware page. I think it's at the Science Fiction Writers website. If you just Google Writer Beware, you'll come across it pretty quickly, or you can use that pretty link, the selfpublishingcoach.com/beware. And that page too will give you some idea. It's a bit of a cautionary tale about the schemes and stuff that can go on and the things you want to avoid, obviously. So let's talk about rewards then next. So I think the primary one that I really like about self-publishing is creative control. So you have control over what the book's content is, you have control over what the cover is, and these are the title, as we touched on earlier. These are things that you might not necessarily have control of if you went with a traditional publisher. Financial control, obviously, that's what we've talked about a lot today. And self-publishing can be a route to traditional publishing if that's an end goal for you. Very often, if writers publish a book and it does really well, traditional publishers will notice that and might offer to pick up the book and publish it themselves. An example that I can think of is, this was 10 or 12 years ago, there was a science fiction writer named Hugh Howey who wrote a really popular book called Wool, and it was selling zillions and zillions of copies. And so what he ended up doing was working with a traditional publisher. He sold them just the paperback rights. So he retained the rights to sell the ebook, but they bought the rights to sell the paperback, and it was published and distributed. And this is the one thing publishers can do that we can't. It was in airports and bookstores all over the place, and that's not something that's going to happen if you're publishing a book yourself, very likely. So that's a possibility. And then one of the things specific to what we're talking about today is that having a book that introduces readers to your coaching, to your work, can really add to what you're trying to share with people. It can also be a traffic driver. So if you've got a book up on Amazon and people are looking for it and they find it and read it, you can obviously have mentions in that book about your website, the other services that you offer. And so once they get into the book, especially with ebooks, you can even have links to your website and to some other thing that you offer that they can go to your website and sign up for. So lots of advantages in that way. And I just want to quickly touch on number 2, financial control. So there are a couple of really cautionary tales that I like to just mention to people. And financial control of our own intellectual property is so important. And I don't think at the beginning, I certainly didn't realize how valuable intellectual property is, which is what a book is once you've written it. It's yours. You created it. They're your ideas and your words. And there's a lot of value in that. Excuse me. And one story I always remember is that when George Lucas and everybody were filming Star Wars, Carrie Fisher told the story later that she didn't retain the rights to her image in the Princess Leia outfits and all that kind of stuff. So she thought that they were making some crappy little B movie that would barely ever see the light of day. And going forward, she realized that by not securing those rights, she lost out on millions and millions and millions of dollars, because every time her image was on a poster or a book or a set of pajamas, she didn't get any compensation for that. So it's just really important to remember how valuable your intellectual property is. And then, so we're getting close to the end now. So I just want to mention a couple of resources. So this is one that's at my website. You can go to the selfpublishingcoach.com and download the ebook version, The Red Hot Truth About Self-Publishing, where I just go through a lot of the mistakes that I made things that I did wrong, things that I wish someone had given me a heads up about, and share those with you. And then, as Christian mentioned at the beginning, the website, the selfpublishingcoach.com, offers coaching packages, also ad hoc sessions to answer your burning questions about publishing. I do formatting for authors. So I use Vellum. People send me the Word document for their book, and then I use Vellum and turn it into the ebook and print files that we talked about earlier. And then this is a great resource as well. It's a colleague of mine, Joanna Penn, and it essentially covers a lot of what we've covered today. The ebook is free, so it's really easy to get, and you'll find it at all the various different resources. And then another resource I wanted to mention, so this is a pretty link. If you go to the selfpublishingcoach.com/pros and cons, that'll direct you to an article at the Creative Penn about the pros and cons of traditional publishing versus self-publishing. And that, my friends, is it. So this is the Q&A portion of the show, I was going to say. So we'll open it up to you guys and invite you to ask any questions that you've got. How are we doing? Oh, we're doing great for time. That's awesome. Yes.
Hi, that was fabulous, Alexandra. I've gone to a couple of sessions about self-publishing, and you are very clear and very succinct, and it was great. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Really
thank you for
appreciate
saying that. Do you have any questions for us, or?
I don't. I think I understand the process. It's you got to write the book first.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yes.
Yes. But thank you for everything, and thank you, Christian, for pulling this together.
Very welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from anyone?
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah. Hi, nice to see you again, Alexandra.
Nice to see you too, Lynn. Yeah, we're on the same island now.
I know. Yeah, so my question is more about writing than publishing. And by the way, that was amazing. That was like, I feel a little overwhelmed,
Yes.
to be honest, because there was so much information in there. But it was very clear, and I know who to call. Let's put it that way.
Okay, good.
But no, my question is more about writing. I'm in the middle of writing what I call a healing guide for women who have lost their marriage or the relationships ended due to infidelity. That was the audience that I was writing it for when I started. And I'm finding now, as I'm progressing through the writing, that it's actually for anybody that's had a significant loss. And now I'm wondering, do I need to go back and look at all the stuff that I've written that says divorce, recovery, and change it to word it better so that it could appeal to anyone that's had a significant loss in their life. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I should just stick with the original plan that I wrote it for, or whether to rewrite it and make the wording better to appeal to everybody. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that I always think specificity is a really powerful marketing tool. So when people know that you're speaking directly to them, and I'm thinking of divorced people at this point, that can be a really valuable tool, because you know exactly who your audience is, and they know who they are as well. And so as far as sort of blowing it out to people more generally dealing with loss, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, Lynn. I think you're going to know maybe when you finish the book, whether or not you want to be really specific and niche, or whether you want it to be more general. One thing that does occur to me is that in the description for the book, let's say you decided to focus just on divorced people, but in the description of the book, you could also say, this also applies to, or is appropriate for, people who have experienced any kind of loss. So that's kind of hedging your bets. I
just added that. I just added that recently, actually, a week or so ago, to the introduction. I said a blurb about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess maybe it comes down to too, who do you want to work with? You know, do you want to work
Yeah.
with just divorced people or people who have experienced loss in general?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a
good
great
point. That's a
question.
good-
Yeah.
It's a good thing to ponder. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Any other questions from anybody? Yes.
Hi, I've just got a question around book length. So I noticed with the words there was the proofreading cost per word, so that will affect costs. But otherwise, in terms of like the charge, that I guess Amazon, the one that you showed was $3.49. Is there like if you go over a certain page count, it increases? You have to be mindful of that. And I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's true. So if your book is ginormous, the printing cost is going to go up depending on how big it is, for sure. And that is going to add to the costs for copy editing and for formatting. Formatters usually charge, well, I charge up to 80, a book that's 80,000 words long.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything above that is a different price point.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for sure that when it comes to, are you thinking of nonfiction or fiction?
Nonfiction.
Nonfiction, yeah. One sort of strategy that sometimes people use is to write shorter books and write them in a bit of a series. Mm-hmm. So even, we talked about series in fiction, but even in nonfiction, you can have a branded series. So the covers all have a similar look and feel, and they're maybe, you know, under the umbrella of one larger topic, but they're short and succinct. Yeah. And in this, you know, I've heard people say lately too, in this day and age where we're all so distracted and there's so much information coming at us, people are more appreciative these days of nonfiction books that are really tight and succinct and really get to the point. Mm-hmm. So I think gone are the days of the 300-page tome, you know, that people would really be able to dive into for weeks on a nonfiction subject. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's just a couple of thoughts about that.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And then I guess you just play around. Can you tell ahead of time when you put in the information, and say it's, I don't know, will it calculate it by page? No, you need to do a word count and submit that to you, and then it calculates the cost.
No, Amazon does calculate it based on page.
On page, okay.
Yeah.
You
so
can play around and see when it goes up, jumps up, or.
Yeah, what's going to happen is once you've uploaded the interior file, it will do its little calculation and then tell you how much it's going to cost to print each copy.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Our pleasure. Any other questions from anybody?
Yeah, I have another question.
Sure.
What is typically the length of an ebook? Like what range would you say is a good kind of length? Well, in terms of words.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess the replying question I would have is, how long is a piece of string? So it really just depends. So in fiction, the different genres do have different reader expectations. So for example, science fiction tend to be long, and fantasy tend to be really longer books. You know, you think of Diana Gabaldon's books are just enormous, that kind of thing. Mystery novels and thrillers tend to hit around the 80,000 word range. Children's middle grade novels are sort of 30 to 40,000 words. So there are some general guidelines in that way. Nonfiction, it really doesn't, it can be any length you want. I mean, I've read some nonfiction books that are, you know, less than 20,000 words and some that are more than 80. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Lynn, that's a vague answer, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
Alexandra, I was going to say I did some research and before we wrote ours, and I mean, again, it is a rule of, you know, the rule of thumb, length of a piece of string, etc. But the suggestion was sort of 30 to 40,000 words, and I think we came in sort of somewhere around that. Mm-hmm.
for your
Mhm.
nonfiction
That
sort of
was fairly
self-help
slim.
stuff.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Nikki had a question as well. Sorry, had you finished, Lynn?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm writing a non-fiction book at the moment, and I've only got the acknowledgement left to do. So, yay.
Congratulations!
But,
Wow.
I know, but it's the questions about formatting. So I've used Scrivener.
Great.
Yeah, and then I've been compiling into a PDF with a 9x6. But then a friend of mine, it hadn't occurred to me that chapters normally start on the right-hand page.
Mm-hmm.
So what I've been doing in Scrivener is adding a blank page. But just listening to you now, I'm wondering, is that something I should be doing in Vellum, or is that something that Amazon does as you upload it for the paperback book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the issue of chapters beginning on a right-hand side page is actually just personal preference. So there isn't really a standard. And when I do formatting, some authors have a really strong preference for one, and some have a really strong preference for the other. So if you want to have a chapter begin on the next page, the next blank page, that's fine. And then for formatting, I think, yeah, Scrivener that's one of its downfalls is formatting. What I might recommend is that instead of exporting, or is it called compiling to PDF, you might want to try compiling to Word, and then using one of those tools. You could try the tool at Draft to Digital. It's free, and see how the formatting works from there with your Word document.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the formatting sort of like, oh wow, I really probably, I've started a KDP account, but I haven't uploaded anything, I haven't put the PDF, it's not ready to go up yet. So I'm not sure what you can do to it once it's in there. It's just set, I guess. Can you see it? Can you see it on the screen, how it looks? So
you can, yeah. Once you upload the PDF print file, they'll actually require you to do a preview, and you can see it there in a 2-page spread, and you can flip through the pages and see how it looks. So you could try that, I suppose, and just see how it looks.
Yeah, right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
thanks for doing
this.
I
Pleasure.
I was driving for the first 15 minutes. So will there be a replay or?
Yes, we're recording, so we'll post the link, and Christian will let you know where you can find that.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
I just want to say thank you, and I have to run. So thank you so much. It's fabulous.
Our pleasure. Thanks so much. Take care.
I would be interested to hear a little bit more about the coaching. If you could talk a little bit more about that, I think that would be interesting. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah. So the coaching really begins once an author feels like they're finished with their book, their own part of writing it. And then what I do is I offer a package of 6 coaching calls with unlimited email support in between. And we go through it. Christian mentioned I have a really comprehensive checklist, and go through it step by step. And what tends to happen is we meet initially, take the next few steps that you need to do, which usually involve editing, finding an editor, that kind of thing, getting prepared to publish. And then just for as long as it takes, we meet for those coaching sessions, and walk through the steps step by step. And I offer advice and support and resources and that kind of stuff until the book eventually is published. And I can help find cover designers and that kind of stuff as well. Because it can be kind of tricky. There are a lot of cover designers out there, and finding the right one can be a bit of an issue. So Christian and Barbara were lucky. That was a personal contact of yours, wasn't it, Christian, your cover designer?
Yeah, my son's girlfriend's dad, who is a graphic designer for a big magazine. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what the coaching looks like. And what else can I say about it? I've never had to pitch it before, actually, verbally. Does that answer your questions, though?
I was
Sorry,
gonna say-
Christian.
I was going to say, shall I say something about it from the user? Because I thought it was brilliant. I mean, really,
Sure.
I co-wrote my book with a friend, and it was the writing. It was an effortless process, and then it was this. How do we get it from here on to Amazon? And we looked at somewhere where you pay them to sort of go through the stages, and it seemed like a lot of money to me. The starting point was a couple of $1,000, and then there were sort of extras. There were, and Alexandra was actually able to sort of point out some of the things that we were missing, and we were just keen to do it as quickly as possible and as cheaply as possible. So we were just looking, and I knew other people had kind of taught themselves, but that I kind of got that would overwhelm me. So it was just a brilliant. It was a brilliant bargain, I'd say, honestly, Alexandra, and it was just great to feel that there was somebody, an expert in the corner there, that every time I got stuck, I could say, what does this mean? Or just even the stupidest question, just, and do you press that? Do you tick that box or that box? Everything. It is. And my co-author we'd agreed that she didn't want to be involved in the publishing, and that was fine by me. I said I'm happy to do it, but it was a great learning experience. So I'd feel a bit more confident next time, but I still feel that's not my bag. That isn't. I'll definitely be coming back to you with my next one, which I'm working on. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Christian. That's lovely to hear.
Yeah, so much cheaper than I mean, I know you're not a cut price service, but just much better value for money and a more enjoyable process, and very, very involved in it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing that one of the things about doing it myself, just coaching other people, is that it's really interactive and one-on-one. And with a publishing service, you're not going to get that so much. But I love working with authors and just helping them with their individual projects and books. It's really fun for me.
I think that's great. I think knowing someone that can kind of hold your hand and guide you through it is amazing. I think I'll be calling you, Alexandra.
Oh, good. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and one of the things too that Christian and Barbara were up against was that they had a deadline because there was a conference coming up before the pandemic struck. And so they didn't have time to really faff around and figure it out themselves. So by working with me too, it was really quick. We were able to do it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So that helps as well. Yeah.
Yeah, because we actually did have someone who'd offered to publish it, in a traditional way, but their lead time was like 2 years or something like that.
Wow.
So, yeah. And we just weren't interested in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it really was quick. I mean, we finished the book and the final editing in early January. It was published in February. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great.
Any other questions that we can help with? No. All right. Well, we could probably wrap it up then. So you guys have got my website address, the selfpublishingcoach.com. If you have any questions, you can contact me through that. And we'll post the link to this as well. If you missed any of it or want to watch it again, it'll be available on, Christian, is it on your Facebook page and your YouTube channel? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, the link will be on the Facebook page of Three Principles Conversations, and it will be open on my YouTube channel just under my name.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, thanks so much.
All right.
And I would just, if anyone who is in the process, do check her out. Check her out.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a great day or evening, wherever you are.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Bye.